Good afternoon and welcome back from lunch. I hope you had a chance to say hello to colleagues you may not have seen in a while and also make some new connections. I'm Taylor Virgin and I'm helping facilitate this conversation this afternoon. I'm a first-year master's student in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, and under the supervision of Monica Emelko, one of our panelists today, and Krystyn Mueller, I'm investigating gene expression of an algal bloom community in a drinking water reservoir. I'm joined today by Narasimhan, who will also be facilitating this session.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Narasimhan Lakshmi Narasimhan. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in the Collaborative Water Program in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. I'm specializing in wastewater treatment, and I work with Dr. Wayne Parker.
This afternoon session, called Water Careers of the Future, offers us a unique opportunity to learn from diverse practitioner perspectives on current and emerging water sector issues, and what knowledge, skills, and attributes students and early career professionals should possess to address them.
We have four great panelists today with us who represent some of the most important career pathways that are available to our water students. Their full bios are available in the World Water Day website. However, I will introduce them briefly now, and as I introduce, the speakers will take the podium. Firstly, we have our very own Dr. Monica Emelko, who will be representing the academia career path. Dr. Monica Emelko is a Canada Research Chair in Water Science, Technology and Policy, and a professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Waterloo. Dr. Emelko's current research focuses on downstream impacts such as water quality and water treatability from climate change-induced wildfires. Welcome, Dr. Emelko.
Next, we have Bill Malyk, who is the Vice President in the water sector at WSP Environmental and Infrastructure Limited, and he's representing the private consulting sector today. Bill's background is in chemical engineering, specializing in wastewater treatment, and he has over 30 years of experience in managing a wide array of industrial water and wastewater treatment projects. Thanks for joining us today, Bill.
Next, we have Carla Torchia, who's representing the public sector. Carla is with the federal government at Environment and Climate Change Canada. Carla is the manager of the Great Lakes National Program Office, where she is responsible for Great Lakes and transboundary water governance, strategic engagement, and related policy development and coordination. Welcome, Carla, to our panel today.
And finally, we have Krystyn Tully, who has more than 25 years of experience in the public interest sector, including 19 years of Great Lakes research and advocacy. She is the president and CEO of Entremission, a social enterprise that helps demystify public interest work. Krystyn is also the creator of The Organizer, a weekly newsletter for nonprofit and social impact folks. Thanks for joining us today, Krystyn.
Before we begin with the discussion with our panelists today, I would like to outline the format of the event. In the first 30 minutes, we'll have some introductory remarks from our panelists where they'll talk about their career trajectory and state of the art of the water domain in general. After that, we'll open up the floor for some questions. Let me have the privilege of asking the first question to our panelists today. Could you please take 2 to 3 minutes each and tell us a bit about the role that you're currently in and how did you end in that role? And I'll start with Dr. Emelko first.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the question. I am a professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. I'm cross-appointed in biology, systems design engineering, geography and environmental management, and the School of Planning. And so I think that reflects that I have what I would describe as a Discovery Channel level of interest in everything. And I think that's how I ended up in the role that I'm in. I'm a professor and a Canada Research Chair in Water Science, Technology, and Policy. To be brief, I never thought I would end up in academia, and I certainly never thought I would end up in a technical role. I had always wanted to go into business. But being in academia is like having your own business without the risk, perhaps. But it also lets you live your life with integrity and explore issues that you care about in a way that you think is appropriate. And so I started off as a traditional engineer, working very much in process engineering. I have a chemical engineering and environmental engineering background from the US. I went to school at MIT for those degrees and then went on to UCLA and then came to the University of Waterloo because this is one of the best places globally to study water. And that's what I was interested in. And my career path has evolved by being in contact with other people, and I think that's the biggest thing for me, is to be constantly learning and learning from others so that your path can go further and further. I went from process optimization, traditional design of treatment processes, to now working on source water protection, climate change exacerbated landscape disturbances, and really looking for resilience in public health protection through the provision of safe water. So I am extremely happy to be here and happy to talk some more. You don't always have to take an obvious path. Every interaction you have in life you can learn from. And as long as you're interested and keen, keep going down those paths. So, thanks.
Bill, would you like to take over? Yeah.
Sure. I don't know if I can follow that up very well, but so I'm Vice President of Water Sector for Canada for WSP. My role is really many roles. It's a technical role, so where I play a process engineering role on key industrial client projects. Really looking at finding innovative solutions for our clients in a lot of different sectors, and so that really has kind of allowed me to branch out in a lot of ways from a technical perspective. I started out as very much a biological process engineer, and I by default had to really develop skills in other areas that my clients were really needing me to work in. So a lot of continuous learning, a lot of sort of taking different pathways and seeing how they work out. One of the other areas that I work pretty heavily in is in business development. So bringing in new clients and working with clients on understanding what their needs are and how to put together projects for them. Project management, but also from a technical perspective. And it's been, in that private sector sort of context, it's been very interesting. Certainly, I don't think I'd change too much about it. Certainly, the companies I've worked with have been pretty varied, and we were talking earlier with a colleague here that has worked with some people. It's a really small field of people. You get to know people, and you run into them all the time, and it's a lot of fun. So.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I've worked in the non-government sector and the private sector really early in my career before I saw an advertisement for a policy analyst at Environment and Climate Change Canada, and I said, why not? And I applied, and 20 years later, I'm now the manager of a group called the Great Lakes National Program Office, and we are responsible for kind of that sweet spot, I would say, between science and policy. You ride that nexus of understanding the science enough that you're able to inform policy development within the government. And, we dabble in transboundary waters outside of the Great Lakes, but a huge part of my focus is on the Great Lakes themselves. And then more recently, 3 years ago, I was kind of tapped on the shoulder and asked to form a team, be part of a team, a tiger team. Some of you might know that the Minister of the Environment received a mandate from the Prime Minister to establish what's going to be known as the Canada Water Agency. And so I've been part of this team working very quietly within government, trying to recommend what the mandate will be, what the scope will be, where we'll go. And that's been, I would say, a highlight of my career. I'm really hopeful that on the other side of this policy making, it maybe changes the way the federal government deals with water. So that's how I started and where I am now.
Krystyn, please. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Krystyn, and I'm guessing at what the folks in the room are probably studying, and every one of you is more qualified to work on water environmental issues than I was when I started. My first degree is in radio and television arts, which I had to pay bills in school, so I got a job as a canvasser working for an environmental organization, and that's actually what brought me into environmental issues. So yeah, when we talk about not having to plan your career path, the idea that I needed a job that I didn't have to be at until after class was over, so canvassing was in the evenings, and a friend of mine was doing it and it seemed like fun, turned into my entire career and adult life. So yeah, you can fall into things for sure. I loved canvassing. I loved going door to door, just talking to people about issues that I thought were really interesting. I thought that was the greatest job in the entire world. And then winter came. And everyone else quit, and I couldn't canvass alone. So my boss at the time was super generous and gave me some make work research projects to tide me through to the next season. And that's when I got interested in environmental policy, and that was very early web stuff too. So helping to write content for the organization's very first website. So again, just someone giving me a helping hand, seeing my interest, opened a bunch of doors for me. And then I finished school, and I knew that I didn't want to be behind the camera. I wanted to, my instinct was different from all of my classmates. Whenever something interesting was happening, they'd get the camera out, and I would want to put it down and go join the interesting thing that was happening. So I knew that I was going to go in a different direction, got a job thinking I could use some of my communication skill sets, my writing abilities. And when I finished university, that was actually the month that the Walkerton water tragedy happened. And so I ended up landing a role as a research assistant in that hearing. No legal background, but the ability to read information and consolidate it and find themes and patterns. And through that, developed a sense of, empowerment, particularly around water issues. It seemed so much more tangible than some of the other environmental issues like forestry. I didn't know what to do about those things, and water seems so straightforward. You can see it, you can touch it, you can tell when it's polluted, you can see species disappearing or habitat changing. And the legal side of it seemed really empowering, the fact that citizens had a role to play. And so what I learned in Walkerton was, it wasn't a tragedy because one thing went wrong. It was a tragedy because there was a whole series of small steps where someone could have done something but made a different choice. And I thought, well, what happens if we can influence those little choices people are making? Could you change what happens and what unfolds? So I ended up being the first employee at the Waterkeeper Swim Drink Fish movement, helping to build that for many years, and then finding kind of the ways of doing the work that really excited me, the intersection of technology and policy, which I think is super fascinating. And then around 2020, decided to leave the hands-on nonprofit advocacy world and use my skills to work with a bunch of different clients. So I still do very similar work, still work with a lot of water and ocean organizations, working on apps, technology, strategic planning, leadership, impact measurement, which is a really exciting area of the work that we do. But I get to work with 10 or 15 different organizations and individuals at the same time. So I get to see what's happening all across the country, and it's very exciting.
Thanks so much for sharing your interesting backgrounds and how you ended up where you are today. Next, I'd like to ask each of you to describe what are key current water issues that you deal with in your day-to-day work, what are your clients asking for, and what do you anticipate will be the key water issues we'll be dealing with in the next 5 to 10 years? We'll start again on the left with Monica.
That's a tough question because there's so many things. I think there's day-to-day things, but I think maybe I'll answer it more broadly. I think that many of the people that we end up speaking with want it all. We want clean drinking water, we want habitats, we want diversity, but we want development. And what I think the challenge is in the prioritization of that, and in the recognition that at times there will be trade-offs and we have to make decisions. For me, that's been by far one of the biggest challenges. I would love to say that there's always going to be a clean, tidy answer for everything, but there isn't. And one of the examples that I always use is, well, okay, let's talk about biodiversity, let's talk about habitat for water, right? I'm a drinking water person, so this is kind of out of my lane of expertise. But it's really important because which species of fish do you care about more? The one that likes water that's a little bit more turbid and deteriorated, or the one that doesn't? And we have this idea that the world we live in is static, that fires shouldn't be happening, but you know what? They're part of the regular ecology, and they have always happened, and they will. And we're not going to prevent them. We are only going to manage their impacts. And so I think that reality and dealing with that reality and still recognizing that there's a lot we can do. There's a lot that we can do with technology, I think, and so that's one of the big things I would say, and related to that is, what is technology? One of the things our group has enjoyed taking on is the issue of, well, what is technology? We had a great piece of work done by one of our master's and now PhD students that talks about techno-ecological nature-based solutions. Again, this pie in the sky notion that nature is going to provide all these solutions for us, but are you going to rely on nature to make sure that your water is safe and that your children or your grandparents don't get sick? There's going to be a built technological aspect to it, but it doesn't mean that we can't take advantage of some of what Mother Nature has done as well. And so I think that all of that is to say that as people who are interested, scientists, applied scientists, and I include social scientists in that discussion, right? We have to do things that are meaningful for people, communities, and the world we live in, and we need to be realistic about it. And to me, those are the biggest challenges, is the how can we be realistic and quantitative and make sure that we're trying to address as many of those needs concurrently as possible. The other piece that I would add to that whole technology piece is, is managing a forest technology? I think so. Of course, one that comes to mind a lot is artificial intelligence. And one of the things I would say about artificial intelligence is, this notion of technology will save you. We've got to be careful about it. And this is coming from an engineer. Artificial intelligence is prone to bias, and we have to know how to use the tools wisely. Right now in the drinking water sector, we simply don't have the sensors to implement artificial intelligence for drinking water treatment. There's a lot of nuance there. That also means there's a lot of opportunity. So for me, again, it comes down to being realistic and really putting constraints around the situation and understanding that we can't always have our cake and eat it too. We need to make some tough decisions, because with changing climate, it's not our things going to change. It's a question of how much, and we need to mitigate and plan forward. So those for me are the biggest issues that we're discussing with partners, but I want to end, because it's very gloom and doom. I'm really hopeful. There's tremendous innovation with all sorts of technology, whether it comes from how we organize, how we meet, how we do things, how we think about things, to natural technology and built technology. So I'm very, very hopeful. So I'll pass
Great.
it on.
Thanks. On to Bill.
All right, well, I'll kind of start in the middle, and coming from the private sector, talk a little bit about what our clients are really looking for. And ultimately, there's great technology out there, but our clients are looking for cost-effective approaches that are going to meet their goals, right? They don't need to reinvent the wheel. They don't want to live on the bleeding edge of technology. They want to live on the cutting edge, but not at the bleeding edge. So they don't necessarily want to try everything that's new in the world. They want to have something that is proven. So that's kind of first and foremost what technology needs to do for people, right? It needs to be advanced, but it needs to be cost effective at some point. Everybody's got to pay for it. You all pay for it. We all pay for it, because drinking water costs money, wastewater treatment costs money, all the products that need water cost money. And so those solutions, have to have an economic price tag to them, so you got to live with that. Some of the things that right now that we're dealing with, we're dealing with some amazing, advances in analytical chemistry that are allowing us to measure compounds into the parts per quadrillion. And we're seeing regulators that are regulating things down to the parts per quadrillion. Like, the US EPA just, put out their latest and greatest, and we're talking about, regulating PFAS down to, single-digit parts per trillion, right? It's really low. It's really hard to know either you're there and to develop systems to protect drinking water down to those levels. So we're dealing with a lot of that sort of advancement, and regulators are picking up on that, and they're saying, hey, we can measure down to this, so we should regulate down to that. And that's got a cost. It's costing everybody. It's costing all industry and taxpayers and everything. It really is a tough, it's something that's really hard to work with regulators on that when they're saying, hey, we gotta get down to these low levels. 0 is where we want to get to. Well, 0 doesn't exist, because somebody's going to come up with a better way to measure. So that's something to keep in mind. In terms of the next 5 to 10 years, I think we really have to be mindful of water scarcity, and I don't mean water scarcity in arid regions. We have water scarcity in this region, right? We have municipalities that can't supply or can barely supply enough water for their own uses, and they're constrained on water treatment. We've got to figure out how to make better use of water, how to use it more than once. And I really, truly mean use it more than once. Like, the notion of reusing wastewater back as potable water has got to become a reality in people's minds. And I think that's fundamental. In terms of population growth, we're seeing urban centers grow, but tax bases aren't growing necessarily, or the ability to service them with infrastructure isn't there. Again, that leads back to the whole notion of scarcity of resources, and scarcity of the ability to treat that water. So that's pretty fundamental. And we're going to see more in the future. We're going to see more, not less, emerging contaminants. We're going to see microplastics. We're going to see compounds beyond perfluorinateds that are going to be discovered as being harmful. And these are changing conditions. It's changing all the time, and we've got to be nimble and able to adjust to those things and be able to think outside the box and how we treat things. So I think that's from that sort of private sector perspective. That's sort of my thoughts.
Yeah, I'll have to echo it and say this. I thought this was a really challenging question, and what isn't a water issue is the first thing that came to mind. Like almost every single issue you can think of at some point intersects with water, and we have to think about it. And certainly experienced that in kind of my day-to-day job, thinking about the Great Lakes. But when we started to put, a lens on thinking about water nationally through the exercise of creating a Canada Water Agency, it was really obvious. I think we've now mapped around 26 federal agencies that have a role in protecting or regulating water. And those are some huge silos that need to be broken to do a job. So what isn't a water issue, I think would be my first point. I think the second point, though, is even within that, you then need to figure out a way to prioritize, because there is never going to be enough money to do everything that everyone wants. And so you need to have evidence-based decision-making to get you to the point of what do you prioritize to work on, and is it defensible? That's a huge part of kind of what I think about every day. Maybe like looking forward, things that are on our radar, and I know will be there 5 to 10 years from now. We won't have all the answers. Climate resilience. How do we ensure that the gains that have been made, and there have been many gains made in the Great Lakes space in the last 50 years, how do we ensure that they're not lost as the climate changes? And it will. We know it already has, and it will continue to change due to the impacts of a changing climate. And then the other one is maybe how do we, within the water space, advance the reconciliation agenda? So move away from what we're doing currently pretty well, it depends on who you ask, engaging, to actually working collaboratively with Indigenous peoples in the basin, but across Canada in the water space. I think those are maybe two issues that keep me up at night, if I can leave it at that.
Thanks so much, Carla. On to you, Krystyn.
So right now, the issues that are taking up a lot of my time, one is the UN Ocean Decade. And that's been really interesting as someone that spent their entire career working on the Great Lakes and freshwater issues, getting involved in ocean issues, and understanding that ocean people, when they say ocean, they mean the one water that is on the planet, and they include freshwater in their interpretation of it, but then they have all these meetings where there's no freshwater people in the room. So that's been really interesting, getting to understand that space and everything that's happening around the UN Ocean Decade. There are a lot of programs, a ton of initiatives. And so our side of that is working on platforms, communications, and ocean literacy, water literacy. How do you get the public involved? And how do you match not just experts that have been working in the field for a long time, but even students with community organizations or teachers that want to teach students or children or whomever they're caretaking for about the ocean, but just don't have the knowledge themselves. So how can we play this matchmaking service to bring people with knowledge to the general public to enhance an understanding of water in the community? And that's really fascinating. ECOP, the Early Career Ocean Professionals, if you're not familiar with that network, they're fantastic, and they pay for travel and conference registration for students and young people, anyone with 5 or less years experience in the sector. So finding resources like that and kind of spreading the word. And on the app side, it's a lot of collection of data in the field. How do you do it? How do you structure data? What is data? And that, I think, is something that I can see continuing for many years. How do you turn information, like a photo of a location, into data? And that's where things like artificial intelligence might come in, or that's where interpretation from scientists in a lab might come in. But yeah, how can you take some information from the environment, turn it into data, and then use that data to draw an analysis of the health of an ecosystem or a location or something that may or may not have happened, how something might have changed? That's a really, really fascinating area. And then the flip of that, if you've got a pile of data, how do you turn that into knowledge that's actually actionable, that someone could do something with? How do you take it to policymakers? How do you take it to technology? How do you take it to the private sector, develop solutions? So just that interplay between knowledge and data is a really exciting time. And then, as Carla mentioned, when you add in the importance of reconciliation and collaboration with Indigenous communities and different ways of understanding what knowledge is and what ecological knowledge is, that's just a really exciting place to be. In terms of what clients are looking for, it's really interesting getting to see what the needs are. So the one thing I would say, if you're thinking about your work and finding work, it's like every client wants two skills. They want the environmental skill that you have and then a +1, and the +1 can be unique to you. So if you are a scientist, maybe you're a scientist, but you're also pretty okay in Photoshop or Canva. You don't have to be a professional graphic designer, but if you can translate science into knowledge, great. If you're a policy person or you're more interested in the policy side of things, but you've also got the ability to write, great. If you're a researcher and you can present at a conference or you're comfortable networking, building relationships with people, that's fantastic. So it's like, what's the core skill that's key to the job, and then what's the piece that you can add to it? And that's what makes people stand out in interviews, and especially in the nonprofit sector where we don't have a lot of money. The fact that you could do two things, you could play two roles in an organization, it's like you're hired in the room. And then once I left Toronto, bilingualism, it never came up for me other than like from time to time, I would have been more comfortable if my French was better. But as soon as we moved, obviously we moved to Montreal, but as soon as we got involved in other issues, the ability to speak both French and English became incredibly powerful. You can do social media, you can write pieces, you can network at conferences, you can participate in more government opportunities. There's a whole other world of academia, different universities that are based, and research programs based at French institutions. So just bilingualism being an enormous asset that comes up over and over again. And looking towards the future, aside from the data knowledge piece, climate change adaptation, I think we're understanding that environmentalism is no longer about remembering what the perfect natural state looked like and bringing it back. It's now about understanding that the baseline is constantly changing and that the future is going to be something different. And what do we want that to be in the mix of natural systems and human and technology systems? And the overarching theme is just always, people have never been good at dealing with waste. So what the waste is changes depending on what the dominant technology or economy of the day is. Maybe it was coal, maybe it's plastics, maybe it's nuclear energy. There's always going to be a waste issue. So if you're trying to figure out what the issues of the future are, it's like just look at the headlines and see what the trends are. Assume people are going to make some waste as they're doing it, and then that will point you in the direction of what the emerging issues are.
Thank you, panelists. I couldn't help but notice that as one panelist was speaking, others were agreeing with them, satisfactorily. So I wanted to give an opportunity for each of you to jump in or build on a point that the panelists made at this point.
Sure. Everything, I think there's a consistency in what we're saying. I think that these ideas resonate. I think they also reflect progress. I really liked your point about the baseline and that things, I describe it as not being static, but we live in a dynamic world. It's so exciting to hear that we more broadly as people are at that point in having the discussion. And so I think that there's a lot of consistency. All of these points tie together. And it's a function of the fact that all of these issues are connected. All of these issues are water issues, as I've heard somebody else say. And so the question is, where do you fit in, right? Where do you want to jump into that discussion? Knowing that wherever you jump in, there's always going to be opportunities to grow and move in different directions, sometimes serendipitously.
Thank you, panelists, for that hopeful picture of the opportunities that are available to us. Let's now turn to our audience. Over the past weeks, we've surveyed our students in the Collaborative Water Program to contemplate some questions for this panel. We have selected a few of the students who will now directly post their questions over to you. As the students ask their questions, please feel free to jump in. One or all of the panelists are welcome to answer their questions.
Great, so our first question is from Ajiro.
I can start. That one's an easy one for me. So I have 2 engineering degrees. If I had it all to do over again, I do have a minor in history, but if I had it to do over again, I would have taken probably another year to do more in the social sciences. I did have social science classes, but my course load was pretty full, and I just think there's so much more to learn. It's really about the connections of decision making for me. I always had this idea, technology will save us. People have to adapt the technology to the technology, and we have to consider things like costs, which I think Bill talked very, very lucidly about. And so it's how do we advance people's thinking and their hearts, and I wish I had taken more time to learn about that, and then to be actionable, to learn to communicate it better, whether it be visually in writing. I really wish I had taken the time to advance those skills. I think that doesn't matter how brilliant you are, if you can't communicate it, it's not going to get very far, right? And so that's what I would have done in my undergraduate studies. I would have taken time for diversity, and I have to put the plug in, forgive me, that's kind of one of the goals of the Collaborative Water Program, is to let people go beyond their traditional academic silos, and the more we can do that, the better.
Well, I agree with that 100%. I think I'm a chemical engineer, multiple degrees in chemical engineering, and that served me really well from a technical perspective. I wish, that I had a second language. I think that's a great point. I've spent a lot of time working in France and Quebec, and it's terrible that I can't speak French. I can't have any sort of communication with folks. And general communications, I would say, being a more effective communicator is, I think, something that I'd wish there was a little bit more emphasis on. There's always courses in, technical writing or, presentation skills that you might do, but, something more focused on more deliberate communications programs, I think, would be very helpful.
I'll go next. I have a science degree. I have a zoology degree from the University of Toronto, and if I had to go back, I would look for a co-op program. I really think there's such value in actually being in a program that allows you the opportunity to explore what opportunities are out there in a real, tangible way. I mean, I have a zoology degree. I don't think I remember what I was going to do with it, to be honest. And then life took over, and you end up where you are. But I think co-op students, I think, get a real advantage in terms of trying to discover who you are and who you want to be and where you want to go. And I can tell you that my particular directorate, which is about 70, 80 people, we hire a lot of University of Waterloo co-op students. And the hiring process in the federal public service is just so onerous. And as a hiring manager, we have shortcuts we can take when someone's been a student. And so a lot of those students, if they do well, end up actually as, junior program officers. And many of them, I think every single director I've worked with in the 20 years has said, I started as a, co-op student, 20, 30, 40, however many years ago. So yeah, I would do that again, differently.
My second degree I did part-time when I was working, and that took 10 years. I loved it. I loved studying while I was working because everything was so applied and practical, and that's when I get excited. It wasn't just theoretical. So if I was learning how to write a policy brief, I could write a policy brief for an issue that I was working on at work, and I got a ton out of that. My one regret is I do wish that I had taken that second BA and at some point pulled the plug on it and just switched to a master's program. 2 BAs is, every time I see the like advanced degree on something, it drives me bonkers because I was in school for 15 straight years. And I feel like that doesn't count as much as it should. So that's sort of a half regret, but also just like a half annoyance with people that want degrees when they're hiring. But I think this question was really interesting, and thank you for this. What I also thought of, like really for the first time, was my brother was in school at the same time as me, and we were the first people in our family to go to university. So I thought of like, I could have done this, I should have done this, I didn't know this. And then I thought like, how would we know? Like our parents had never been to advanced, degrees. And so like, I didn't know when I got to school that I needed a bunch more money to buy supplies. And I was in a tech program, so we had to buy like tapes and hard drives and headphones and expensive gear. And so then I was working extra to try to pay for all that stuff that I didn't know I needed. So just like learning how university works was what I actually spent my first degree doing. So my regrets aren't that deep because I also feel like there's no way that I would have known. I couldn't have known. So go easy on yourself if your I wish I could have planned it better list is too long, because it's just life.
Great, thank you. I think that's a great point to end on. Our next question is from Arisha.
Mentors are critical, and they come in all different forms. I'm going to build off of the last question. So my parents also didn't go to university, and I had to figure so many things out, including going to university. Certainly they wanted me to go. They were both immigrants who valued education, and my dad worked in a factory, worked 2 jobs just so that we could live in a decent zip code to go to a good school. That was the goal. And so I felt, first of all, number one mentor was my dad, because he worked hard. He worked hard just so that we could have things. I always felt like it was my responsibility to do better. And I was good at that. My mom wanted a doctor, and my dad wanted an engineer. And it's like, public health engineer, there you go, parent pleaser. So that was my first mentorship, was really learning work ethic, and I'm forever thankful for that. My second mentor was my high school teacher in grade 9. English is my second language, but I learned it when I was young, right? But still as a young child, I sounded like somebody who their first language wasn't English. And I had a teacher in grade 9 who said, Monica, I know you want to do something medical or engineering or whatever, but my goodness, you have to learn to write. And she took extra time with me. She actually invited me to her house. And she, anybody from my group knows I love having people over for meals, but you don't know where I get that from. And my grade 9 English teacher invited me over, and she made me a really good meal, and she said, you can't learn if you haven't had a good meal. And she's like, you need to learn to write, or otherwise it's not going to come together. And there's a whole backstory there, but that was my second key mentor. My third key mentor was the one who helped me put together a university application because I didn't know how to do it. And long and short, I could go on, but the long and short is we recently cited some of his work in our research because he's like a superstar in working with spores, bacillus spores. So he's a biologist, and it was just a real trip to actually contact him to cite his work. But he helped me to apply to university, and so then in moving forward, you meet people who you go, my goodness, I just want to be like them. And they take time out of their days to spend time with you. We're all busy. We're all busy in different ways. But finding the people who, and I'm going to go back to something, that is what my kids talked about in elementary school, which is people that make you feel good, people who believe in you. They're not going to blow sunshine your way, but people who really will help you advance in so many ways, in connecting with people, in knowing how to tell a story, in any way that is a positive way for you. They can be just amazing, and that's where serendipity comes into play. It's like you meet one person and you go, I wasn't on that path, but I like them so much, I'm so inspired by them, I'm going to take this right turn. And I think the thing is to not be afraid of those experiences. As long as you're enjoying what you're doing and you feel like you're making a positive contribution, those things will turn into amazing experiences. And so my point in mentors is that they often give us the courage to do things that we might not otherwise do. Now, there's also another kind of mentor too, which is the kind that you meet and you go, I would never want to be like you. That's also, or having a job, right, where you go, I never want to do this. It's a really valuable experience. And so keep your eyes open for it and acknowledge it for what it is and move on and be okay, feel okay about it. So I hope that you all have great interactions with people who will be great mentors to you, because it's amazing how they can change your life. And you don't forget them either. So I love mentors.
So a lot of what I'll say is very similar. Again, I came from a family that nobody went to college before. I was the first person in my family to graduate from university. My father worked at a pulp and paper mill in a small town. Wayne Parker will know all about it. We, lived a reasonable, level, but he wanted more. And so similarly, I think, my father was that sort of first mentor. But, teachers, you learn from somebody all the time. Even if it's a little bit, the negative mentor point about, boy, I really don't want to do this job. Like, I don't want to shovel tar off this roof ever again, is something that you learn. You'll find mentors in all shapes and sizes. I met with Matthew earlier, and some of his mentors are guys that I know and were mentors of mine, and I still communicate with. So, you don't have one mentor, you don't have one best mentor. I think everybody contributes to what makes you whole. So I think that's really important to understand, is that just take an opportunity to learn from people.
So maybe I'll jump right into a mentor in the public service. And funnily enough, Michael Goffin, who was asked to be here, but he's at the UN Water Conference this week, and then kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, could you do this, Carla, because I'm not available. Don't tell him, but he is one of my mentors. You can't tell him. I never wanted to be in management. I was really happy working in the federal public service, being a really rock solid senior policy analyst and doing my work. And, one day he tapped me on the shoulder and said, you've got this, you can do this, and you should do this. And I was like, really? And it starts there, but it starts, somebody who you could always go to with a question, whether it's related, to the day-to-day business of work or something a little bit more esoteric, and always has time to give you really thought-provoking advice and strategic advice, very glass half full kind of person. Somebody who always taught me, and this is a skill that this mental trick that I always do, which is, what does yes look like? So, sometimes when you get hit with a challenging question, and your instinct is to say, oh no, we've never done that, we couldn't do that, the rule's this, the rule's that. I usually pause, I count to 10, and I go, okay, what would yes look like, and how could we get towards a yes, still, obeying all the rules and whatnot. Great person to have around you to kind of, just support you in terms of taking those next steps, but also being a sounding board and taking the time to be a sounding board. And then I just really want to reinforce the notion that you do come across a lot of people who, they're the anti-mentor, and you look at that and you go, yeah, okay, I don't ever want to be that person, and you retain that knowledge, and there are moments where you kind of go, okay, I don't want to do this, I want to do things another way. I like the way you frame that as well.
Yeah, I agree with the whole thread of there are positive mentors, people who take time for you, and then there are examples of sort of the anti-role model. I think mentoring, the great thing about it is that you don't actually need the mentor's consent. So you can learn from people whether they know it or not, or they understood that that's what was happening. And so the things that stuck with me, oftentimes it was like, I don't even fully remember the person, but they had a really great way of taking notes, or they made amazing meeting agendas. And so you actually become the accumulation of all of the knowledge and skills and practices and techniques of the people you meet along the way. And you just get to decide filter fish, which ones you want to take in and keep and which ones you want to let go. And so look for those tiny ephemeral opportunities. What can I learn in this moment? What can I learn today? One of the things that I used to encourage our students to do, and then I started doing it myself, is just making a list of like, what did I learn this week? What did I learn today? And then you think, well, who did I learn that from? And you'll realize over the course of your adult life that there will be dozens and dozens of people who influence you and teach you things. For a professional or more formal mentoring structure, I'm involved as a volunteer with an organization called Fora, and they have a program, Girls on Boards, which just changed its name to Rise on Boards, and it's about creating board training opportunities and board experience opportunities for underrepresented people in the nonprofit sector. And so they actually mentor young people for a full year. You get placed as a young board member on an existing nonprofit organization somewhere in the country, and you develop the formal skills of how to be a board member, looking at changing what boards look like and how they make decisions in the future. So I think that formal training opportunities like that are really fantastic as well. And if you can marry your volunteer time with professional skill development, it will be really rewarding.
Thanks so much. Our next question comes from Rachel.
I'll go ahead and start. No, I did not know I always wanted a career in water. When I graduated from university, I wanted a career, and I was looking to be employed and, pay bills and that kind of thing. And so I went a very traditional route. I had studied environmental engineering, but I also studied chemical engineering and went and worked for a consumer products company for Procter & Gamble. And I realized during that time some important attributes, because people always ask you, what kind of job do you want? And people think, what courses did I like in school, et cetera. And for me, it was realizing how I wanted to conduct myself day to day. I was frustrated in that we couldn't go in deeply into finding answers. And the other part of it for me was that we wasted a lot. We heard about waste, right? There's always waste products. And it frustrated me because I wanted to have the mandate to do better in that arena. And so I went back to grad school, as my supervisors in undergrad had told me that I'd be back within 10 years. And sure enough, I was back within 2 years rather. And then sure enough, I was back within 2 years, and I was looking for something different. And not necessarily water, but I fell into water because people encouraged me to go in that direction. And it's that serendipity I keep referring to. But once I got into it, I realized it was a good fit, and that there are so many different ways to be involved. And I mentioned previously living my life with integrity. I feel good every morning when I wake up. There are better days than others, but I feel good every day feeling like I'm working in an area that I care about, that I'm passionate about. And I realized, and I say this to students now, for me it was that. I needed a job where I could feel like I was living my life with integrity. And that is how I ended up in this job, in this type of job. And it makes a huge difference in how you approach your career. So I'm very thankful for that, but it took me a long time to figure that out.
My answer is yes. I pretty much did. As I mentioned, I came from a small town, a small pulp and paper town that has a terrible history with pollution, contaminating a long stretch of river with mercury that is still a problem today. And it created a great deal of bad press for that town. And I guess my thinking was, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a way that we can address these problems and think about them before they occur, and do something about them. And I've had the opportunity to, throughout my career, to be able to work on problems like that, and a little bit on that problem specifically, which is interesting. And like I said, Wayne Parker comes from the same town, and I don't know if that influenced him or not, but that was something that did influence me and did kind of drive me towards this industry.
In short, no. As I said earlier, I have a zoology degree, which is really it was the only degree I could get at the University of Toronto that was remotely approaching what I was trying to study, which was a kind of environmental science ecology. I graduated and I didn't know what to do with it yet, so I decided to go and look for work. And like I said, I ended up with a non-government organization and then a private consulting firm. And then I think I was at that point where it's like, it took me longer than 2 years, but I was like, I think I need to go back to school and do a graduate degree, or I could apply for this job. And then here I am, after applying for that job with Environment and Climate Change Canada. The beauty of the federal public service, I think it is, you get a graduate degree while working, because you can really take that job and other jobs and other assignments and do whatever you want. It is a huge employer. You could be anywhere. And once you're in the federal public service, you can really take your career where you want it to go. I was fairly lucky that in mid-2000s, I had the opportunity to work on a special project. And the project at the time was, hey, we have this Canada-US agreement, Canada-US Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. It's kind of old, it's outdated. Not sure we're really implementing it anymore. We need to do a review of the agreement and decide whether it's time to renegotiate this agreement. And so we embarked on a Canada-US, multi-year project, multi-stakeholder project. And I was assigned to one little task, and that's, lots of other people were working on other pieces of it, like, there were nutrients annexes, and, got all our nutrients experts to go and talk about whether that was sufficient. I had this special project of asking what's not in the agreement currently that should be. So it was very much blue sky, big thinking. And I think that at that point, and it's about bringing people together, bringing the experts together and having a dialogue and managing a dialogue such that you emerge on the other side with some clear advice. And I think that moment I was hooked. I was like, why am I working over here when I could be working here? And I did my level best over the next year to get myself in the group that would work on Great Lakes. And then, 5 years later, I'm the manager of the group. And so, yeah, no plans to work in water, but I think, there's a spark at some point, and this is where I want to be. And I've been there ever since.
My answer is also no. I didn't know. And I was joking beforehand with someone that when I saw the question, I was like, I still don't know, actually. Both the water piece and the career piece. So I love water issues personally. There are times when you work on environmental issues that you do need to remember that if you do this because you love nature, that you should actually step away from your computer or the office and go and spend time in it. So there are times when I actually want to keep a bit of separation with my career and my appreciation for nature so that I don't lose that joy. That's the reason I'm doing it in the first place. And then the career part, I have a hard time committing to that. I love my company, I love doing it, but it doesn't seem like a career. I just get stuck on that word. There's a quote that I love in a book, is wherever two paths meet feels like home for a while. And so I try to find homes. What are projects that I want to get involved in? What are problems I want to figure out how to solve? Who are the people that I want to work with? And as long as that feels like home, then great. And when it doesn't, that's, move on, life changes, continue, et cetera. So the idea that you have this narrative arc from the beginning of your career to the end of your career that is a consistent, holistic story, I'm not there yet.
Thank you, panelists. At this point, we would like to open up the floor for the larger audience here. If you have a specific question to one or all of our panelists, if you could please put up your hand, I can call you out.
That's a tricky question. And I think what I would say is that no matter where you are, there's going to be rules. And so you have to decide which ones you can live with and which ones can't. That's part of living in society, right? Is there's rules. And so that's the first thing I would say. But I think that for me, forging a pathway, I think I've always tried to live my life with integrity. And so it's that kind of that voice in your head that says, do I want to have this fight or this agreement or this disagreement? And then of course it's how do you go about it, right? And so I think that that's always a challenge for us. I think being a student is particularly challenging because of power imbalances, whether they're real or perceived. And as a faculty member, I can tell you that most universities work very hard to make sure that they're only perceived and not real. But nonetheless, it's a daunting position to be in, especially if you come from a circumstance like many of us, like mine, where you don't have many resources to draw upon, right? So that can be challenging, but the reality is that there are people available, there are resources available, and so you do have choices. For me personally, with respect to work choices, I mentioned I worked at Procter & Gamble. We used to landfill. We made a oil of Olay bar soap. I had the patent on that. It's like a typical chemical engineering job working in consumer products. And we used to landfill thousands of bars of soap as we tried different formulas. And I remember asking, why are we doing this? And it's like, well, if we give them to a homeless shelter or whatever, then we're no longer patentable. And I just remember sitting there going, that's ridiculous, right? And so for me, that was increasingly difficult. And then the cost and the practices. And so for me, the choice of integrity was to find a different career pathway, right? I wasn't going to change Procter & Gamble. I wasn't going to change the rules, if you will, around intellectual property protection. And so I think you have to decide which aspects are fights worth fighting, or which ones that where you want to make change, and which ones aren't. And you have to come to terms with, we have a society and it's structured in a certain way. And this goes back to our earlier discussion of trade-offs. Why I like being an academic is because I get to pick and choose which projects I work on. And so that's for me the big integrity piece. If I don't believe in a technology, if I don't believe in a practice, I don't have to get involved in it. And to answer your question more specifically, when did I start to feel that way? I think it was after I left Procter & Gamble and went back to grad school, because I saw a clear path then to decision making. But what I would say to you in practice too is you'll always find people that are like-minded. You will find a home at the intersection of the two. I really liked that. That was really cool. You'll find a place that fits for you, and keep your eyes open. I often say to people, I know this is hokey, but I really do think this. The universe is talking to you. Are you listening? So don't be afraid to see those opportunities, and also don't be afraid to talk to people. I know my answer is very vague, but it's a very personal process. So again, for me, it was about picking the projects I choose on, and I think it was driven very much by that previous experience. So the more you can figure it out what really, really bothers you, the more you'll be in a clear place to resolve it for yourself.
Would other panelists like to add more, your personal values and the careers that you're in?
I'm happy to add, this does come up a lot in the nonprofit sector. People are drawn to the sector because they have specific values, caring for the community, a desire to serve or to be of service, a desire to create change. But people are messy. And so you can be in an organization with a fantastic mission and terrible internal practices. You can be in an organization that has an unexciting corporate mandate, but fantastic people and ethics and ways of doing things. So I think you're looking for a combination of both the mission or the purpose of what you're involved with, and then the day-to-day experience of the people who are there. And a really helpful exercise specifically to do exactly what you were just talking about is figure out what your top are. What are the top 5 values that are important to you look like, or how does that manifest in your day-to-day life? And then seek opportunities where you can be consistent. So integrity is acting in a way that is consistent with what you've said or promised or what you value, and that will be different for you as it is for you or for someone else in the room. So just know what those are specifically so you can chase them.
I thought maybe if I could just jump in for a moment, just from the point of view of a public servant, and this is always a tricky one, I think, for us, right? I can tell you that I consider myself a Great Lakes advocate. I can tell you that I work with 50 other people who consider themselves Great Lakes advocates and are passionate about protecting and restoring the Great Lakes. And I think we all go to work super excited in the morning, kind of asking ourselves, what great thing are we going to do for the Great Lakes, today? But we're federal public servants, and that means something. And that means that we don't get to dictate policy, right? It's not our role to do that. We live in Canada, and there's a democracy, and we have elections, and people vote for MPs, and they vote for a prime minister, and they set the direction. And so there's two things that you have a duty to when you're a public servant. One is to provide what's called, sometimes you hear it called fearless advice. You know, what is the fearless advice you would give a minister when asked? And that advice has to be evidence-based, right? And the other thing you are obligated to do is implement the programs that cabinet, that governments decide are the programs of the federal government. And it doesn't matter where you are in the federal public service or what department you're in, those are your two fundamental obligations as a federal public servant. And you have to be okay with that. You can come in with all sorts of really great ideas. I would say you have to be the kind of person that is in it for the long game. If you want immediate, change, federal public service is not for you. You'll get burnt out fairly quickly. You have to be in it for the long game. And you have to prepare to deliver the same quality of advice and service no matter who's in power, no matter who the minister is, no matter which stripe of government. But you can't innovate in that space. And I've seen it done. And, this idea of creating something called a Canada Water Agency, it came to us with no limitations around it at the beginning in terms of what it could be, what its mandate, what its scope is. And we've just spent, 2+ years thinking through, what is the best advice we can give government. At the end of the day, government will decide. It might not be exactly what we pitched, but on the other side, we will implement what's been decided. So I just wanted to leave the message that the federal public service, integrity is a core of what we do, but we're in a system. We don't make all the rules. These are.
And I'll just add to that, because I'm in the private sector working with private industry, with municipal governments and whatnot. There's limitations to what you can achieve. You try and influence the best decisions, but ultimately there's a point where there's only so much you can do. You influence, you do the best you can to influence, and ultimately, as a professional engineer as well, you've got a duty to the public. So you've got to think about that. You've got to think about what's the right thing to do here, and sometimes you have to step away and you have to make a decision to say, no, I'm not going to work on that project, or I'm not going to work with that client because I don't believe in what they stand for. And we've certainly done that, where there's clients that we just don't believe in what they stand for. We have walked away. So that's a personal decision that people have to make.
Thank you so much. Our next question is coming from Lynn.
Absolutely. So when I think about the people that I serve, there's the students, undergrads and grads, and I hope that working with them makes an impact on their advancement in their careers and their decision making. Then I have industry partners that I work very closely with. So our group is very connected with communities of different sizes and government agencies of different sizes, whether it be local, provincial, or federal. And for us, a big part of it is and you were talking about actionable science previously, that is literally part of the mandate of what we do is, we want to do useful work, right? That's part of, science-based decision making. And so we're constantly checking and rechecking and trying to work in groups diversely, and also with industry partners, with consulting agencies, because some of the challenges we're dealing with, they're big issues. They're not for one or two people to address. And so absolutely those partnerships are essential, in my opinion. And I hope that I believe that we are making advancements and impacts, because otherwise we wouldn't have those opportunities to continue working together. So absolutely, and that's one of the exciting things about the water sector, is that there are so many opportunities, and there are big wins and there are small wins and there are setbacks, but as long as we're moving forward, that's the goal.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I mean, the opportunity to work with different stakeholders, First Nation stakeholders, community stakeholders, government stakeholders, academia, that's something that we're continuously working to evolve, to try and bring on new technologies, new approaches to projects, listening as well to what people have to say, what's important to them. How things are executed is really important. And without that, you wind up doing things that, were unintended, but don't work out well. So I do feel connected.
That's another yes here. I think, building on the last question, within the bounds of what I'm able to do, I definitely feel connected. And maybe just reflecting back on a comment I made earlier about, what does yes look like? I think that serves me really well when I'm, talking with First Nations people or academia or non-government organizations. It's trying to find our way through what tends to be pretty complicated issues and decision making that sometimes can feel really slow or goes at glacial speeds, but trying to find what a yes looks like for as many people as possible. So yeah, I definitely feel connected.
Yeah, I feel really connected to the people that I work with, my client organizations and client individuals. I have an enormous amount of affection for them, and I want them to succeed. Our mission is to help promote sustainability and equity through organizations that also operate sustainably and equitably. I should probably find an easier way of saying that. So being able to do the work in a way that is consistent with the work, I feel very connected to that. On the nonprofit side and the activism side in particular, there is one pitfall that isn't really talked about very often. And so I would say that I don't think I am representative of my community. And I don't want to pretend that I am. So when you get into activism, oftentimes something happens. So there's a personal experience that you have or a threat to something that you love, or you get drawn into it. But after doing that work for 20 years, I wasn't the person I was when I started. I wasn't from a lower income community anymore. I wasn't dealing with the issues that I had been dealing with that made me so passionate in the first place. I had a more stable job and career, and I just didn't want to carry that narrative that an activist is sometimes encouraged to carry around forever, that they're no longer, like they're not a professional, they don't know what they're talking about, they're just someone from the community who cares a lot. It's like, no, I've been doing this for 20 years. At some point, I'm a professional and an expert in my field, and I don't feel good pretending that that's not true. And the environmental movement in general has done incredible things, but hasn't been incredibly representative of all communities and all people. And so I think my interest is more in how can I be a bridge to what the next generation of the movement is going to look like. And I don't really consider myself to be someone who's a spokesperson for anyone else. And so that's what service looks like to me now. And so I think it's interesting how our ideas of connection and representation can change over the course of our careers.
Thanks so much. So we have one final question, and it's coming from Hang. Okay, I think it's a really good question, and it ties into some of the discussion earlier about your university experiences, so I'll ask it. What specific knowledge, skills, or attributes are helpful to have when seeking a position in your organization or sector? What do you think hiring managers value that candidates wouldn't expect?
For me, it's empathy. Empathy is being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, right? If we're going to take on wicked problems, we need people who can connect with people, and empathy is the key to that.
I mean, you've got technical skills, but I mean that's a given. You come out of your degree, and you've developed these really great technical skills. I think people are looking for, well-rounded. So what else do you do? And I think. It was brought up before, like what are some of your other skills that aren't your technical skills, whether it's interpersonal skills or, outside interests that they connect with people. It's that connection with people. I think that's important, and that's some of the skills. When you're in an interview, if you've been in co-op interviews or whatever, I mean, your best chance of getting a job is actually make a connection with that person. So those interpersonal skills and communication skills go way beyond what your technical capabilities are.
I was thinking definitely that ability to work really well with others is highly, highly valued and needed. Difficult to test. It's easy to say the words, I think, in an interview. I think as a hiring manager, it's not so easy to figure out how to test for it. And then the other really important skill is kind of that strategic thinking, you know, how you connect various dots that aren't necessarily obvious, and those people that can connect the dots and take the conversation or, you know, the problem resolution to another level are highly, highly valued. Again, really difficult to test. Which is why I think co-op placements are really important. I think a lot of hiring managers use co-op placements as a way to find those bright lights and then nurture them.
Yeah, I talked earlier about the 1+1 thing, so I won't go too much into it, but that creativity, creative thinking, but curiosity, it's like if you are curious about how things work and you have the ability to learn, you can do almost anything. So I think that quality is really important. And in terms of testing people's ability to learn, I don't know if any other hiring people do this same thing, but one of the things I like to do, if you do 2 interviews, like the first one's usually a lighter screening interview, checking your qualifications, and then you might get a second in-depth interview. I would often ask a question in a screening interview that I knew that the candidate couldn't answer. Like you wouldn't have information or you wouldn't be able to answer it, so I could get a sense of how you might think on your feet. Then I'd ask the same question again in the second interview, and there are people who had clearly never thought about it again. And there were people that it had bothered them that they didn't know the answer to a question, and they had gone and studied it or looked it up, and they came to the second interview. And that person almost always got the job because it showed that they were curious and they cared and they wanted to figure something out. And so it was essentially a trick, but watch for it.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Anyone from the audience? Yes, please. Yeah.
So is the question for employment opportunities? Okay. So it is amazing how persistence and keenness and curiosity can get you places. Of course, with professionalism as well. And so I know in the academic sector, people come, they find volunteer opportunities that can turn into positions, contracts, because it's about the keenness to get involved, right? I have such a tremendous interest in helping people get to the end point they want to get to. If you have that enthusiasm, that professionalism, how can we say no? We find ways to work people into the system. And it was like the comment earlier about the co-op students where you can find a way to help them out or employ them or to get them connected to somebody. And so I think it's the recognition that if you're persistent in a professional way, that those opportunities will present themselves because there will be people who will really admire and appreciate your tenacity, right? And it goes along with learning from those interactions, because sometimes you just can't help somebody, but you might encourage them to go elsewhere. But if you stick to it, those opportunities will present themselves.
I generally agree with that. I think there's lots of opportunities for networking. There's lots of opportunities to meet people, engineering societies, and with other online resources. Like people are willing to talk to you, right? I don't think I've ever had a situation where somebody said, "Hey, can I have a 15-minute conversation with you? And I want to talk to you about this, about my career or something like that." We've all been there. We've all, tried to figure out what the heck am I going to do next, and it's hard. And having a conversation with somebody is welcome. It's great to talk to people. I mean, about what they want to do, and so that opens some doors. And you're interested in this? Well, maybe I can introduce you to this person. So I think there's lots of opportunities out there. So I don't think co-op's great. It's not the only thing. Not everybody gets the chance to be a co-op student. So there's definitely opportunities.
And we all want to hire good people, right?
Absolutely.
Like we all want to.
I would echo both those comments. I really like, Krystyn, your comment around curiosity. I think that is huge in an interview context. And I don't think interviewing doesn't just happen in a formal interview sense. So picking up on the comment of if you're out networking or out at a conference or you manage to get yourself in the room with people, showing curiosity, passion, evidence that you are somewhat aware of the topic at hand, all of those things, I think, shout to the rooftops that you might be somebody that is, employable. And co-op students is it's one way in. There's lots of others. I personally just filled out a job application and went the old-fashioned route.
Nonprofit sector, there's no shortage of work, there's just a shortage of money to pay for the work. So understanding ways, if you are able to volunteer, just reach out to organizations doing work you like. Don't wait to see posted jobs. But also there's a ton of funding opportunities, wage subsidies for people 30 and under. And so again, you don't have to wait for an organization to post a job. If you can get one of those wage subsidies, like pre-qualify, then you can contact organizations and say, I'm pre-qualified, I have a wage subsidy, I can come and work for you. And most organizations would be happy to create an opportunity because they have a ton of work to do. So it's easy to kind of invite yourself in if you're able to tap into those, or some universities have some subsidies for paid co-op placements. Anything like that to help make it easier for someone to say yes. And just a couple practical things. If you are an international student, make sure you're noting you are legal to work in Canada, you have the ability to work in Canada, you're already here if you're already here. Some of those things that might prevent an employer, if they're looking at a stack of 100 applications, from thinking that you might be trying to come into the country, or some of the other just details about making it easy. I'm here, I'm ready to work, and usually if you make it easy for the employer to say yes, they'll find a way to welcome you.
All right, as we close the session for today, I wanted to thank all the audience members here for their very, very thoughtful questions, and even a bigger thank you to all 4 of our panelists for your time, insights, and guidance. So as a small token of our thanks, we have some mementos for you, so please accept them. Thank you all panelists. I hope you all broadened your perspective on the challenges and opportunities available in the water domain. That formally concludes the Water Carriers of the Future sessions. I now invite Mr. Kevin Beamer, the Managing Director of the Water Institute, to deliver his closing remarks of the conference.
Thanks, Narasimhan. I'm actually not going to provide closing remarks, but I'm going to provide closing thank yous. First to the participants today. Thanks very much. This is our first in-person World Water Day event, I think, in 3 years. So it's really nice to be back communicating as human beings rather than through technology. The panelists, thanks very much. That was really articulate and inspiring. And I know people say inspiring a lot, but as getting to the later stages of my career, I found so many parallels, and it's really, I think, really valuable for people of all ages to learn from the experience and the wisdom of those that have been through this before. But I think, as Narasimhan said, this presents a pretty positive picture for you. Most of you at the front end of your careers. I think water presents a great opportunity. Specifically, Narasimhan and Taylor, thanks very much for your expert facilitation. That was really great, and we have small mementos for you also. Thank you. Okay. I'd also just like to thank a few people specifically. Derek, you and your team, for all your help today. Much appreciated. My colleague, Nancy Gaucher at the Water Institute, that helped put the panels together and some of the heavy thinking and lifting for today. Thanks, Nancy. SWIGS, the Graduate Student Association of the Water Institute, also integral in the planning and execution of this event, and there's a bunch of volunteers here today. I'd like to thank the volunteers and your representative, Isabel Jurgensen, on our committee. And last but not least, special shout out to Julie Grant, Julie's also Nancy and my colleague in the Water Institute. And Julie produced this event and did so much more behind the scenes and in front of the scenes. So thanks so much, Julie. Okay, finally, there's a social tonight at the Hoother Hotel in Uptown Waterloo, 6 o'clock. All are invited to celebrate World Water Day with some liquid refreshment. Oh, sorry. It's at 4:30. Thanks, Isabel. I forgot we accelerated the time, so you can start walking down there right now, and you'll get there just in time. So again, thanks very much to all. Happy World Water Day, and have a great rest of the day.